Winter is still upon us with weeks to go, says Puxatawny Phil. Thus, what are we to do? With the recent cold snap all across the country, I'm still enjoying creamy soups and chilies. Let's embrace the cold, continue making those veggie-filled healthy soups, and add a bake to make them special, and even more indulgent. Welcome to Summer Bakes the World. We're baking traditional breads and dishes from all over the world. What better bread bake is there to eat with soups and chilies than a good old traditional cornbread? In light of the cold winter and the fact that who can't really tolerate gluten anymore, I really want a bread indulgence. So I decided it's time to embrace the cultural significance of traditional cornmeal. Having grown up in the American South, I can talk all day long about Southern cornbread. One of my grandmas was known for her cornbread, and my Native American, Choctaw, and Cherokee ancestry, of course, suggests that I should have some affinity for the grain, which I do. Maybe someday I'll bake a traditional Southern cornbread for you, since after all, it is in my blood. However, for today, I wanted to check out traditional cornbread recipes in other parts of the world. That search, friends, led me to Serbia. Serbia is located in the West Central Balkans in southeastern Europe. For most of the 20th century, it was part of Yugoslavia. It is now an independent nation. During World War II, the Balkans were under communist rule and forced to surrender their wheat to be exported to other countries. What were the Balkan families to eat? Well, as it turns out, corn was that answer. It was during this time that cornbread became an integral part of Serbian cuisine. So, with the lack of wheat, they made the most of it and created their own version of bread using finely ground cornmeal. The simplest, most common cornbread made was the Serbian Proja. What I find interesting about this bread are the ingredients that are not traditionally found in the American version. I'm looking forward to this bread because I definitely know my cornbread, and this recipe, friends, is unique. Not my grandmother's cornbread, I assure you, although hers is like the best that was ever made. The recipe I'm using today is a family recipe not from me, but from a Balkan grandmother. I was intrigued by this version because of its simplicity and authenticity. You most certainly can find all sorts of recipes on the internet with additions and changes to most any traditional recipe, but I intentionally look for traditional recipes that tell a country or culture's history through food and ingredients, not through additions that alter its story. With that, let's look at the ingredients. You're going to need cornmeal, yellow or white that is finely ground like flour, eggs, baking powder, sparkling water, I'm using seltzer, sparkling seltzer, it's fine. Neutral oil, I'm using avocado, but as long as it's flavorless, it'll be fine. Salt and feta cheese. Now you know what I'm talking about. The unique differences in this authentic recipe are sparkling water and feta cheese. Kajmak is also commonly served with this bread. Kajmak is simply a clotted cream similar to a creme fraiche. You could think of it as a very soft, fresh cheese. It is found on traditional Serbian tables at mealtime. To get started, since we have no kneading and no resting or rising time today, we can go ahead and preheat our oven right now. So set your oven to 350 degrees, which I've just done, so it's warming up. And now we're gonna go ahead and prepare our pan. So you're gonna need an 8x8 square pan. Spray it with cooking spray. Okay, we're just gonna set our pan aside for now. Now, in a large bowl, we're gonna add and start with our wet ingredients. So you're gonna add 3 eggs, and I do my eggs separately because I wanna make sure that I don't get any shells in my container or get a bad egg. Okay, so 3 cracked. And we forgot our apron. Okay, I realized as I was cracking my egg, I need an apron. So break up your eggs. And then to this, we're gonna add 4 tablespoons of oil. Just whisk it up. All right, one of the unique ingredients in this recipe is adding seltzer water. And I waited until I needed it before I opened it. I wanna make sure it was nicely carbonated. When you measure out liquids, you should really pour them on a flat surface. so that you get the right amount that you're pouring in. We need 1.5 cups here. If you pour this while standing up and holding your measuring cup upright, you're gonna get all sorts of crazy numbers that you may not want. So just keep it on a flat surface. So 1.5 cups of carbonated water. This is seltzer water. By the way, did you know that there's a difference between carbonated water and seltzer water? Ooh, notice that. I've never seen that in my cornbread. It all comes down to where it was carbonated. So seltzer water is naturally carbonated and usually has finer bubbles. Seltzer water or club soda has been factory carbonated and it follows the soda factory rules, even though it's not considered soda. A lot of times it has bicarbonate salt in it to produce more bubbles and finer bubbles to represent and look like the natural carbonated version. It doesn't matter what you use, seltzer, club, or sparkling, but just know sparkling is gonna be natural, seltzer and club are gonna be factory made. And if you're unsure of which one you want, just look at the ingredients. If it has added salt in it, you may not want that one. You may want a different version or another brand. Our wet ingredients are nice and whisked up. Now we're gonna add the dry. Just push your wet ingredients aside, and in a separate bowl, you're gonna add 3 cups of cornmeal. It should be finely ground like flour. If you buy the thick version, you may not get the consistency that you want. To that, we're gonna add 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then we're gonna add a full teaspoon of baking powder. And then just whisk them up a bit so that you get that all mixed in and well combined. So it's all separated because you don't want clumps of salt or clumps of baking powder in your cornbread. Let's add our dry ingredients to our wet ingredients. So just pour in your dry ingredients and then just stir well. Actually, it's okay to use your whisk. I think that works just fine. Break up those large cornmeal chunks. It's not as thick as I thought it was gonna be. The next unique ingredient is the feta cheese. Now you don't have to use feta, but we are all about authenticity, at least today, and most of the time we try to be. So let's crumble in a good amount of feta. You can decide how much you want to put in here. This is an 8-ounce container. I am likely not gonna put it all in here, but we'll just see. Just wanna make sure that it disperses throughout. The recipe does not tell you how much feta cheese to put in here because it's an optional ingredient. So I think you can decide how much you want based on how much feta you like. You don't have to put feta in here. I know some people don't like feta since it's goat cheese. A lot of people aren't a fan of goat cheese, so you don't have to use it. But this is also, if you don't want to use the cheese, then this is where you would serve it with the kajmak, soft cheese on the side or on top. So if you think about it, Southern American cornbread is often served with buttermilk. So this would be kind of like in place of that buttermilk. So put as much as you'd like, stir it in. Goat cheese can be fairly strong. Feta cheese is a little bit of a milder version. So you just decide, I love cheese. Any type of cheese, the stinkier the better for me. I think I'm gonna go with about a little bit over 4 ounces. Okay, just make sure we stir it in there well. I'm really excited about this cornbread. I get to eat this bread. You know how excited I am about this? And it has cheese in it. Oh, I'm all giddy right now stirring this because I know what's to come. Okay, we probably shouldn't stir it too much. Just blend it in well together. Let's add it to our pan. What an easy bread today since we don't have to knead or let anything rise. This is gonna fill up my pan. If I were you, I would smooth out the top a bit. In the oven it goes. We're gonna bake it for 30 minutes or until it's completely baked through, and I will probably try the toothpick method to see that it's done. Ready for the oven. All right, 30 minutes, I checked my cornbread and it looked just a little bit wet in the center square of it, so I put it in there for another 5 minutes. The timer went off and it's still in the oven because the last step is that we need to turn the broiler on. This is traditional of Serbian cornbread. Turn the broiler on, allow it to brown the top of the cornbread. It'll take 2 or 3 minutes. Just keep an eye on it so that it doesn't burn. And then we'll take a look here in just a few minutes. It's almost done. All right, it's all done. Take a look. Notice the dark brown bits on top from the broiler. It's nice and thick. Looks like a traditional cornbread to me. And guess what? There's no flour in here. It's just cornmeal. As hard as it is, we're gonna have to let this sit for a few minutes and let it cool slightly, and then we will dig in. Okay, our cornbread's been sitting out for a little bit. It's still warm, very, very warm, hot, but I do want to point out a few things. It did rise quite a bit, and it hasn't even shrunk at all. And there's no flour in here. It's just cornmeal. So you don't think about cornmeal producing a thick bread like this, but it did. Notice the cracks, which is traditional of cornbread. Another thing you can see here is that there's some white specks from that cheese that we put in here, the feta cheese. All right, so we've cut into it. Notice how thick it is. You can see all the feta cheese dotted throughout. It looks very light. It has a nice bounce back to it like a traditional bread, though it is cornmeal. So it looks like it has flour in it, but it doesn't. So let's tear it apart. That's beautiful looking bread. Ooh, I love the dotted cheese in there too. You could probably put another cheese if you wanted to. Like chunks of cheddar, not like grated cheddar. So how simple is this cornbread? You know, typically Americans add flour to their cornbread and make it more cake-like. However, my Southern family recipes don't add much flour, if any at all, to their cornbread. So my take on the differences might be a little different from yours. So right off the bat, I can tell you visually the differences between a cornbread I'm used to, being from American South, to this one, is that my grandmother always cooked cornbread in a cast iron skillet with butter and the shortening melted as the skillet heated up in the oven. This one isn't quite as dark on the ends that I'm used to seeing in my traditional cornbread. Even though it says it's not cakey-like, it looks cakey-like. Let's give it a taste. This does taste like a good cornbread to me. The difference is there's no sugar in it. A lot of traditional American cornbreads have sugar. I didn't grow up in a family that used sugar in their cornbread, so I'm used to the less sweetened version, I'll say. If you're someone who doesn't really like sweetened cornbread, you're probably gonna love this. And even though it's only cornmeal, it tastes like it could have some flour in it because it does have that cakey look to it, and it tastes like it has something other than just cornmeal, but it's not. Remember, we use the really finely ground cornmeal. That makes a difference. The feta cheese is very subtle. Even if you're not a fan of feta or goat cheese, I really don't think you're gonna have a problem with this bread because there's not very much in it. It's dispersed throughout. And cornmeal has pretty strong flavoring in itself. So I think with a little bit of feta, you're not gonna notice it so much. There's a lot of cornmeal flavoring to it. I think it's between the baking soda and the carbonated water is what gave it such a cakey light feel to it. So I have to say, I'm very impressed with this cornbread because I did not expect this at all. I really expected a very dense, small loaf of bread, and this is not it at all. The sparkling water adds the height to it. So I think there is a good reason for using sparkling water and having feta cheese with this. The feta cheese cuts down that cornmeal flavor. You definitely should try it if you like cornbread. This authentic Serbian cornbread is not very dense. It is grainy and cheesy. It's traditionally served with sauerkraut, boiled cabbage, yogurt, or cheese. I like cornbread. So particularly in the winter with chili and beans, for me, this cornbread is a nice, unique version, little different from the usual American one. If you are looking for something a little different to eat on those cold evenings, give this a try. You might find you enjoy the cheesy edition and this version of cheesy edition. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe to my channel and share my videos with your family and friends. Until next time, Shivali, Brate, go back the world.